Hello there. That's a bit cheesy, isn't it? I got a new gimbal. I thought I'd give it a try, and I thought, why not? What better way to do it than to give it a cheesy test? Anyway, hello everyone. It's been a while, I know. It's been a bit of a rough summer for me, and I thought maybe I would just take a moment and test the gimbal, which I probably should stop it actually because it's going to get annoying, I think, and say hello to everyone. And so, so hello everyone. I think I'll see if I can frame up a better shot, maybe less of the Jeep in there, and just turn off the tracking. So I don't think we really need it. At any rate, it's been a bit of a rough summer for me, and I finally made it back into the bush. It's been slim pickings as far as getting into the bush this year. Normally I would have been up quite a bit by now. And especially now, September, October, November is my favorite time to go. It's absolute heaven up here during those times. But I've had a bit of a rough go of it this summer. Well, really starting in December of last year. For whatever reason, I started having more frequent migraines, and I get the really nasty neurological type ones. I don't really get severe pain anymore. I used to when I was younger. I haven't gotten the severe headache part of it for probably 20 years or so, but I get blind spots, I get confusion, I get numbness and pins and needles in my hands and face sometimes, and and confusion. I get a lot of nasty neurological type symptoms, and so for whatever reason, the frequency went in December of 2024 from about 2, 3, or 4 a year, usually 2 to 3, to one every couple of weeks. And that was a bit alarming, a bit concerning. And, I made it through a period of time doing it like that. And I tried a few things, some magnesium protocols and other things. And one seemed to work, and that was a pretty heavy duty magnesium dose, sort of daily. And I went for about 6 weeks without a migraine. And then actually, the first time I went into the bush this year was the first time that they returned. And I got 2 in the same day in the bush, which I'd never had migraines in the bush. Never had that before. That was a bit of a new phenomenon for me. And that started a period of me getting them even more frequently, more often than one every couple of weeks or week and a half. And so I started looking around, and I to find something else, because the medications don't really work. They never have worked for me. I think they're hit and miss for most people, actually, anyway. And so I started looking around for other things, and I ended up finding, well, not before they increased in frequency to like 1 to 2 per day, which really kind of freaked me out. I mean, I went to the ER at one point. I'd had some weird neurological symptoms going along that with it, sensation based, and it was on one side, and that concerned me. So I went to the ER one time and got a CT scan and all of that, and actually had an MRI scheduled, which is actually supposed to be coming up in September. It's the Canadian healthcare system that everyone praises so much around the world. There's a long wait for things. At any rate, they didn't find anything. The CT scan was okay, and the blood tests were okay, with the exception of, actually, I was low in serum sodium and chloride. So that's interesting. I'm not a heavy salter. I never have been. I have a little bit of hypertension, mild, and I've been advised to go with low sodium, but I practically already am. And my blood test confirmed it. I mean, it was below the recommended range. And I ended up finding a woman by the name of Angela Stanton online. She's got actually a Facebook group, and she's a PhD research scientist, and she actually took it upon herself to do a bunch of deep diving into migraine because she had them. And it interfered with her getting her PhD. It interfered with her lecturing because she did do a bunch of that. And so she decided to investigate it as much as she could. And she actually created a migraine-free situation for herself. And so I've been following her protocol a little bit more, which ironically has to do with increasing sodium intake. So, among other things, there's a lot of dietary things connected to it as well, a lot of which I was already doing actually, because one of the most sort of repairing type of diet, she's got a few different protocols. One of the most sort of deemed to be a reparation or repair type diet is actually very carnivore based. And I was already doing that, but not quite in the same vein as her protocol, and not as strict. I mean, I was strict carnivore, but not managing percentage of protein to fat intake, you know, like really strictly like she does. At any rate, it's been better since then. You know, I had that migraine when I was up in the bush the first time this year. Ironically, I'd recorded a video, which I didn't upload, because I ended up getting a migraine right while I was videoing. That's when the first one showed up, when I was videoing. It made me a little bit gun shy to video today, but I decided, you know, to heck with it. I'm going to do that anyway. I'm just going to get my coffee. So I'll let you track me again, and we'll do that. I was just using the bumper of the Jeep as a table, but at any rate. Yeah, so I ended up getting a migraine, and so again, they start with blind spots usually for me, and then more visual aura, and of course I can't drive, so I'm up in the bush by myself, and I can't really drive, at least not past a point, right? So I drove down the mountain as much as I dared to with my vision the way it was till it got bad enough, pulled off the road and took a nap, and eventually it went away, and I was sort of back to it, and I found a spot. There's a spot overlooking the valley floor that I can get to from here. So I decided to go there so that I could call my wife and just tell her, just so that she knows, just in case, I don't know, in case what, I don't know, in case we got to send the father-in-law looking for me perhaps or something. At any rate, not that long after I talked to my wife and let her know I was okay and everything, I got another one. And that had never happened to me before. I'd never had more than one in a day. And I'm not even sure that it was actually more than one, although it was two distinct episodes that behaved the same way start to finish. So I don't really know that you could call that the same one, because normally, if you know anything about migraine, the cortical spreading depression, which is this depolarization wave that sort of moves across usually one hemisphere of the brain, it moves at a certain rate, and when it's done its business, it's done its business. It usually peters out. It's not like there's a second lap, at any rate. I have been doing better since I've started the Stanton protocol, and we'll just see how it goes, obviously. And I do still have my MRI scheduled for later this month, so we'll see if that turns up anything. I kind of doubt it, because I haven't had any more of the really weird neurological symptoms for a while now, so, and you know, obviously that's comforting. At any rate, today I'm up here. I thought I would say hello. I'm in one of my favorite places. It's really smoky up here today, unfortunately, which is, yeah, it's unfortunate. I would have liked to have done a little bit more camera work, fly the drone, do a little bit more aerial photography, but there's just a lot of atmospheric smoke. It's not from near here necessarily. We haven't had any fires. We have had actually a very good year where I live for fires and whatnot. There are a number around the province, but we've been fortunate. We've had actually a nice year. We had quite a bit of rainfall in the spring and even in the early and mid-summer. And in fact, it hasn't been until the last couple of weeks when it's got really quite hot. But the nice part about it being in the last couple of weeks is being the end of August and beginning of September, the nights always cool down regardless. So if you get that same kind of heat, 32 and 33 degrees Celsius during the day in, say, July or June, the evenings don't cool off. So you get up in the morning and it's already like an oven outside. And this time of year, it's always cool in the evenings, regardless of how hot it gets during the day. So it actually makes it quite bearable. You can open up the windows of the house at 8 p.m. or so and start cooling everything back off if you so desire. On the way up here, actually what led me here, because there's other places I go, and I wasn't going to come here this year necessarily again, partially just because of that gun-shy bit of, last time I was there, I had these migraines. However, the other day I was at an A&W. I go often to A&W in the morning once a week, and I do some writing and just have a coffee. It gets me out of the house to a different environment where I don't know, there's something about being at home and trying to write sometimes. I'm doing various writings, including a family kind of autobiography. And there's something about being home which I feel like is almost an impediment to actually writing. There's too many distractions, too many things that need to be done. The cat wants attention, the wife will ask me a question. Sure, I could go on the deck or whatever, but still, I just find that there are more distractions at home. I can go to the A&W and there's lots of other sort of silver-haired guys there. Usually groups of them that meet together, old guys clubs, and they talk. And that's distracting, except I find it isn't. I can ignore them somehow much easier than the distractions at home. But the other day, I'd gone to A&W and had my coffee, and I was writing, and a couple and an elderly fellow were seated in the booth next to me, and I overheard them talking, and it pinged my ear because they were mentioning this valley. They were talking about their son, who is a skidder operator. And so he was going to be moving job sites to up in this area, this fellow was saying. And he was going to be driving, instead of a skidder, he was going to be using a harvesting machine, like a buncher feller, or feller buncher. And that piqued my interest because I like coming up here, and there hasn't been a lot of heavy industry in this valley for a little while. They had done some. They've kind of beat this area to death, really. I kind of thought maybe they were done, although last year, the last trip I took up here, I investigated a new road that had been punched in on a hillside, and I could see where they had flagged off a cut block. So this is a live stand of trees, a lot of mature cedar and other species there. And, there's fir and spruce and pine, of course. And I could see they'd flagged it off, and there was some markings, they all often, on a tree with a spray can, they'll mark some numbers, which usually have to do with the cut block signifiers, and they'd flagged off the boundaries around a creek, which are way too fucking narrow, I will tell you, watershed kind of boundaries. So that stand is obviously earmarked for harvest, for destruction. And so the last trip I took up last year, I'd taken my DSLR up and I had photographed a bunch of the trees. It's sort of like, death row kind of a thing, right? Because they're going to be cut down. And so when I heard this guy talking, I thought, oh, maybe they're harvesting that because they hadn't harvested it yet. When I came up here earlier this year, no one had been there. In fact, the road that they'd punched in, they ditched it. After I had found that site, it was the last trip I took up here last year. Between that time and the first time I came up this year, they had ditched the road, like they put in these heavy ditches, right? So that obviously the runoff still operates properly and they don't end up washing the road out anyway. It's still ditched. So anyway, when I heard this guy talking, I thought maybe that's where he's going to be working. There's another valley up further, which I like going to. Maybe he's going there. Then there's another mountain. All of this is accessed from the same main road, same main artery. So I was curious, so I thought today I would come up here. And when I started on the base of the road, I could see it had been brushed and graded. And that's obviously never a good sign if you would prefer that they leave an area alone for a while. When you see that they've brushed the sides, because of course nature takes it all back, right? The sides of these roads, they get overgrown really fast. And logging trucks, of course, swing wide when they turn around, of course, especially these switchbacks and tight corners. And so they want it all brushed so that they've got good visibility if trucks are coming the other way, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, they've graded it. So I thought, oh boy, they've probably been up in my area. And I was pleasantly surprised, actually, though, when I turned one of the corners where you branch off on another road. I suddenly realized, oh no, in fact, I'll show you sort of what it's more like. So if you look at this area here behind me, you can see all of that. You can see all of that, how close the brush is to the road. And that's typically what it's like, and it will just keep going. I mean, I've had to cut my way into places before if I don't want to scratch the truck all up or whatever. I'm driving the Jeep today, but it'll grow right across the road. I mean, it'll come from both sides and it'll just overtake the road. So they do all this brushing, and I was surprised to see it looked more like this when I got onto the road that leads to this one than it did before. They brush it pretty wide when they brush it. If they're going to send a machine up to do it, they're going to make it worth their while, and they have on the lower part. So I'm not sure exactly what's happening. If it's that they are coming to do this other section I was talking about that has been marked but has not been harvested yet, and they just haven't brushed the rest of the road, or if they brushed further on the other road but that I didn't take, the fork I did not take, and they're harvesting somewhere up in there this year, because he was indicating his son would be working up here this fall. But usually, if they're not finished doing work in an area, the machines stay up here until they are. I mean, you'll often come up these Forest Service roads and you'll find different kinds of machinery on the side of the road, grader, the brushing machines they use, which is usually often some kind of a harvesting machine with a brush head on it that they use to just clean up all the shrubbery and whatnot. They make an awful ugly mess, of course. Oh, I should switch this off. Let's move back where we were. And we'll switch that off so it's not annoying. Anyway, I was surprised to see that, but that still doesn't mean they're not, coming up here this year. They could well be yet. I don't see any machinery. I don't see any equipment. I haven't heard anything. Mind you, here I won't because of the creek. But I've stopped at a couple of other places, and oftentimes if something's working, not always, well, usually I can hear a grader, quite distant, right? Certainly a caterpillar, a dozer, I can hear them working quite a ways away. Sometimes they'll even use helicopters for various parts of the project. They have heli-logged in these areas in the past, but I haven't heard any helicopters for the last couple of years, which is nice because that's obviously very disruptive. I like these places that I can come to and I know that I'm not likely to run into anybody. I pretty much never do, and I really don't up here. I won't here, not on this road. It doesn't go much farther, and it ends essentially. And there was a bridge that went across a creek, several switchbacks up the mountain on this same road years ago, and they've actually pulled that bridge right out, which is a nice sign. It makes it, it stops me being able to go there with the vehicle, but I can hike through the ravine and hike up the road farther. But that also means that they're not going to be doing any work up here for a while, and I just assume not, right? I've got this kind of, we've discussed it before on my channel, but I've got this kind of love-hate relationship with the forestry industry, because a lot of these places, obviously, I would never be able to access if it weren't for old logging roads, et cetera, et cetera. We all like lumber and paper and everything else, but the stewardship, I think, leaves a lot to be desired. It just plain does. And that includes the government agencies that are responsible for it. We have our forestry ministry, and of course, the government has to approve any of these cut blocks. And so I often wonder when I get into a region that's just been hammered to death, and it'll have been hammered with logging, and then there'll be a forest fire sweep through a section of it, And then I would think, okay, this area needs a break, you guys. You know, because they'll advertise, they'll claim, you know, less than 1% of British Columbia is harvested in any given year. It's like, that may be true, but if you start thinking about how long it takes some of these places to recuperate, and then you start looking at certain areas, well, certainly not less than 1% of that mountain has been harvested in any given year, because they're hammering it to death. And a lot of these cut blocks are close together with very, very narrow little strips in between. And it just doesn't seem to me like a kind thing to do to the wildlife. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be all that conducive to regeneration of the forest itself. I mean, granted, they replant a lot of these places, but if you were to do small enough woodlots, you probably wouldn't have to do any of that, because nature takes it all back anyway. And it just makes you wonder, you know, about that stewardship. And then there's a watchdog group, I can't remember the name of it offhand, but their job is to, they work independent. They're a government agency, so they're not, I mean, how independent can they be? But they're supposedly independent from the forestry ministry here. And they are, you know, they're tasked with checking into forest practices and whatnot, but their budget is really, really small. I think it's only something like $4.5 million a year for the province. And that includes Vancouver Island, of course. And I think they have somewhere on the order of 17 employees. So, you know, $4.5 million starts getting stretched really thin over 14 or 17 employees across the whole province. And so they really only seem to do 2 audits per year across the, you know, BC is a, you know, geographically pretty large, and they can do 2 forestry audits per year. And so they'll usually spread them out as well. One up in the north of the province somewhere, one in the interior somewhere, or the island, and that's what they have to do every year. So there's just not a lot of oversight. And even at that, I've read some of their reports. They're not as thorough as I would like. They don't seem to go back multiple times. They'll often visit a logging operation while it's in full swing, and they want to check things like water tankers being on site and having adequate water for fire suppression and things like that. I would want to see them go back after the logging operation has finished up and see what they've left behind. You know, the zero waste that they often leave behind. I often see myself, because I go back into these areas, I'll go back after a logging operation is done, and I'll see the absolute geoengineering that they've been doing, like terraforming is what I meant to say. I mean, the way they've cut in roads and different things. And yes, they ditch the road per the prescribed amount, but some of the other disruptions that they've done, they don't seek, I think, to reset any of that. And it makes it pretty nasty, what they've done. And they'll often take piles of logs that they're not going to try to harvest, that they're not financially viable for one reason or another, and instead of putting them into slash piles and burning them like they're supposed to, they'll just push them into a ravine. I've got a number of photographs on my phone of logs in ravines. And, I've been looking for someone to speak to about that, but no one seems all that interested, actually. And no one seems to be all that interested in a citizen questioning the timber licenses in given areas, as I said before, where it seems like they've over harvested and the area could use a break. They've got their protocols and they're following them, and vote differently, I think, is kind of the answer they like to give you. I'm not sure voting differently is going to help, because we already have sort of more left-wing type government in British Columbia, and they seem to be just as happy as anybody else to be awarding all these timber licenses. Anyway, that's enough griping. It's beautiful up here. I am going to try and hike up the bank here with my DSLR and just see what's in there, because this is another stand of timber that I'm a little worried about, because there's some mature trees in here, And so at some point, they're probably going to come in here and take them out. So I'm going to keep an eye on it, because even, if I, depending on, how much photography I do today, I may come back and do more if there's more photogenic trees in there. At any rate, that's what's been happening with me this year. This is the first time I've made it back into the bush since the earlier part of the summer, when the migraines started becoming daily. And I thought I would say hello, because it's been quiet on my part for quite a while. I hope everyone's doing well. And yeah, I managed to avoid commenting on any current socio-political events. That's good. Probably a record. Trying to think less about this stuff. Stoicism is the order of the day, I think. At any rate, I hope everyone's doing well. I would look forward to comments and feedback down below if you feel so inclined. Have a good day.